wasn't a monster. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't even revenge. The Strangers terrified audiences in 2008 with something far worse: violence without reason.
Listen.
A knock at the door, a smile behind a mask. Evil that doesn't explain itself, doesn't chase with logic, doesn't stop when you beg. Director Brian Bertino turned A Quiet House in the Woods into one of the most suffocating nightmares of modern horror, a film that proved silence can scream louder than blood. Behind the camera, accidents, paranoia, and raw performances blurred the line between acting and survival. And off-screen, its legacy crept into real life.
No, you... Please!
Changing how people lock their doors and listen to the night. These are the hidden stories, the strange truths, and the chilling details that made The Strangers a nightmare you couldn't shake. Here are 20 weird facts you didn't know. Number 1. Before The Strangers ever terrified audiences with its quiet dread and masked intruders, it began with something even more unnerving: reality. Writer and director Brian Bertino wasn't drawing from pure imagination. He was drawing from his own childhood. As a kid growing up in Texas, he remembered a night when strangers came knocking on doors in his neighborhood. They weren't selling cookies or collecting for charity. They were testing, knocking randomly, asking for people who didn't live there. Later, those same houses that hadn't answered were broken into. That seed, mixed with echoes of the infamous Manson family murders, grew into the nightmare of The Strangers. Bertino has admitted that what made the concept scarier to him wasn't gore or monsters. It was the simplicity of it. Evil could arrive at your door without reason, without motive, just because you were home. And that raw seed of truth made the film far more chilling than fiction. Number 2, the masks, the doll face, pin-up, the sack head are now horror icons, but their creation was deceptively simple. Early designs leaned toward grotesque Halloween-style monsters, bloody clowns, skeletal faces, even rotting flesh. But Bertino scrapped them all. The masks were altered and dirtied to look like they could have been picked up at a local store. And that's what makes them disturbing. They're not theatrical, they're not supernatural, they're ordinary party masks, stripped of fun, turned into emblems of faceless cruelty. Actors wearing them described how unsettling it felt to stare at their reflection. Behind the mask, they could smirk, scowl, or even feel fear themselves, but the outside world only saw silence. It was that silence, that refusal to explain or reveal, that elevated the killers into something archetypal, evil that wears a smile and never speaks. Number 3. Liv Tyler didn't have to fake her fear. She prepared for Kristen by studying victims of violent crimes, learning how adrenaline can twist breath and break voices. But on set, Bertino went further. He deliberately kept her isolated between takes, separating her from Scott Speedman so her loneliness deepened. During filming, he would whisper sudden instructions into her earpiece, telling her to cry, to hyperventilate, to collapse in exhaustion without warning. Tyler's ragged breathing and trembling weren't acting. They were responses to shock she wasn't prepared for. The result was a performance so raw, it left her emotionally drained for weeks after filming wrapped. Number 4. One of the strangest inspirations for the Strangers masks came from American nostalgia. The design team searched through catalogs of the 1950s and 60s costume masks, searching for images that captured an eerie innocence. They wanted the killers to look like they had stepped out of a faded family photo or an old Sears catalog. The dollface mask, with its exaggerated eyes and painted lips, was meant to echo a child's toy left too long in the attic. The pinup mask resembled the glamorous veneer of vintage posters, a smile that looked hollow once stripped of context. And the sack mask, simple, crude, hand-cut, was a reminder of rural anonymity, the kind of homemade disguise that could be crafted with nothing but boredom and malice. By tapping into the past, the masks carried a strange familiarity, as though they belonged not to monsters, but to neighbors, family, or strangers you once trusted. Number 5. The 3 actors playing the killers rarely socialized with the rest of the cast. They stayed in costume during much of filming, waiting in shadows, masks on, faces hidden. Bertino encouraged this separation to maintain unease. Tyler said it was unnerving to walk into a scene and see the same blank masks staring at her, even if the cameras weren't rolling. By the end of the shoot, the cast admitted they barely knew the people behind the masks, which only made their presence more haunting. Number 6. When Universal Studios first tested the film, audiences didn't just squirm, they left. Entire rows of people walked out during the quietest sections, unable to handle the slow tightening of dread. One executive panicked, suggesting more gore to earn the fear. But Bertino held firm. He argued that the walkouts weren't failures, they were victories. People weren't bored, they were overwhelmed. And when the film finally opened, he was proven right. The same quiet moments that drove test audiences away became the ones fans still talk about today. Number 7. The Strangers barely scraped its R rating. The MPAA threatened to push it to NC-17 because of its intensity. Strangely enough, it wasn't the stabbings that worried them. It was the hopelessness. The psychological dread, the prolonged shots of victims begging for life pushed the censors over the edge. Universal Studios had to argue that the film was no worse than classics like Halloween or Psycho. Eventually, the R rating stuck, but it revealed something unsettling. Sometimes, dread is harder to censor than blood. Number 8. The film's ending shocked audiences not just for its brutality, but for its bleakness. In an era where most horror films still dangled hope, a last-minute escape, a twist of survival. The Strangers refused. Brian Bertino wanted to craft an ending that felt like a cold slap of reality. The couple doesn't outwit their attackers, they don't get saved by the police, they simply endure and are destroyed. During test screenings, executives panicked. Some begged Bertino to shoot an alternate ending where Liv Tyler's character crawls to safety, or the strangers are unmasked. Bertino resisted, knowing that compromise would unravel everything he'd built. In the end, the studio relented, and what audiences got was one of the most unflinchingly grim conclusions in modern horror. That final image, masks removed, killers blending back into the daylight, wasn't catharsis. It was a haunting reminder that evil doesn't need to die for the nightmare to continue. Number 9. The strangers are never named. Not in the script, not in the credits, not in any official material. Dollface, Man in the Mask, Pinup Girl, those nicknames came later, from fans and marketing. Bertino deliberately stripped them of identity. He wanted them to be unknowable, not legends, not slashers with franchises, just a presence, a knock on the door. By denying them names, he denied audiences the comfort of categorizing them. They weren't killers from a story, they were just killers. Number 10. After the film's release, police stations across the US reported a spike in home security calls. People weren't just rattled, they were terrified of being the next knock on the door. News outlets ran think pieces about how the strangers tapped into post-9/11 paranoia, the sense that danger could slip into safe spaces at any time. Horror movies rarely affect behavior, but this one did. It made audiences change routines, check locks, and sleep with lights on, proving its terror had bled beyond the screen. Number 11. Liv Tyler, who audiences knew from Lord of the Rings and countless romantic dramas, wasn't the obvious choice for a horror lead, but Bertino wanted someone who could embody both fragility and resilience. A woman who looked like she could break and then find strength again. What Tyler didn't anticipate was how grueling the shoot would be. She later confessed that she spent most of the movie in a state of sustained panic, and the crew pushed her deeper into that headspace by keeping her off balance. Scenes were filmed in long takes, with sudden bangs on the walls or intruders appearing in her peripheral vision without warning. Tyler's screams weren't always scripted. They were ripped out of her body in the moment. By the end of shooting, she said she felt drained, almost like she'd lived through a real attack. That exhaustion is etched into every trembling breath we see on screen. Number 12, the infamous first knock, "Is Tamara here?" Looks simple, but it took more takes than almost any other moment. Bertino obsessed over the cadence, pause, the pitch of the actress's voice. He wanted it just wrong enough to unsettle without tipping into parody. Too polite, and it wasn't scary. Too menacing, and it broke the illusion of innocence.
Tamara home?
After hours of repetition, the final take captured it perfectly. A flat, almost bored tone that felt eerily real, like something you'd hear at midnight and never forget. Number 13. During filming, the atmosphere was so tense that the crew invented a code word, sunshine, to break the mood when things got too heavy. If someone was overwhelmed after a particularly long night shoot, anyone could call out sunshine, and the crew would pause for a breather. Liv Tyler admitted she relied on it more than once after being startled by unexpected entrances from the masked actors. It was a small lifeline in a production that often felt like psychological endurance theater. Number 14. The crew joked that the house was cursed, but there were nights when it didn't feel like a joke. Power outages would strike at random, plunging the set into blackness during key scenes. Equipment would fail without explanation. One evening, as they prepared to shoot an outdoor scene, every generator cut out simultaneously, leaving the cast stranded in the dark woods for nearly an hour. Tyler later confessed that in those moments, even knowing she was surrounded by crew, she felt the prickling sensation of being watched. The isolation of the set didn't help. The house was so far removed from town that cell service was spotty, and neighbors were virtually non-existent. For a production already centered on paranoia, those real interruptions fed into the actors' unease. By the end of filming, some crew members admitted they weren't sure if the curse was real, but they were certain the house had a presence of its own. Number 15. Night was both ally and enemy on set. Bertino insisted that much of the film be shot at night for authenticity, which meant the cast and crew were living like nocturnal creatures. Call time started at dusk, and they rapped as the sun came up, for weeks. Their body clocks inverted, creating an eerie, dreamlike haze that seeped into the film itself. Liv Tyler described stumbling home as the birds chirped, her nerves so frayed she couldn't sleep, only to wake again in darkness and return to more fear. Crew members joked that they were becoming part of the nightmare, wandering through grocery stores in daylight with thousand-yard stares. The exhaustion, the isolation, the disorientation, it all bled into the final product. The darkness wasn't just in the script, it was under everyone's skin, making the terror real long before cameras rolled. Number 16. Scott Speedman, known mostly for Felicity at the time, wasn't used to the suffocating pace of horror. Bertino gave him almost no space to act cool or detach from the moment. Instead, Speedman was thrust into scenes where his only job was to react viscerally, instinctively. One sequence in particular nearly broke him, when his character picks up a shotgun and accidentally shoots his friend. That moment wasn't just a shocking plot twist, it was filmed to feel like an actor's nightmare. Speedman was given minimal rehearsal. The timing of the intruder creeping into the house was intentionally delayed, and when the bang went off, his horror was genuine. He later admitted he walked away from that day emotionally gutted, sick with the idea of how easily panic can make you the villain of your own story. It's that raw grief in his eyes that keeps the scene from feeling like a twist. It feels like trauma. Number 17. The stranger's movements weren't choreographed like a typical horror villain. Bertino encouraged the actors to improvise their pacing, their entrances, and even how long they lingered in a room. Sometimes they were instructed to step into frame and leave immediately, other times to stand in silence just outside the camera's focus. This unpredictability didn't just unsettle audiences, it unnerved the cast too. Liv Tyler recalled moments when she didn't know where her attacker was coming from. In one infamous scene, Liv Tyler hides as the masked man drifts silently into the room behind her. The script only called for him to enter, but the actor lingered, tilting his head, standing impossibly still. Bertino didn't yell cut, he let the camera roll. Tyler didn't know how long he'd stay there, and her rising panic was pure instinct. That haunting image, a woman unaware of death breathing behind her, became the film's most iconic shot, all because of an unscripted pause that froze everyone on set. Number 18. When The Strangers premiered in 2008, it didn't need flashy marketing gimmicks or big stars to make its mark. Word of mouth alone carried it, spreading stories of audiences screaming at the screen, of viewers too shaken to walk back to their cars in the dark. The film opened modestly, but quickly became a sleeper hit, grossing over $80 million worldwide on its tiny budget. More importantly, it reignited the home invasion subgenre, proving that fear doesn't require supernatural monsters or elaborate effects. Sometimes it's just a knock at the door. Critics were divided, some calling it too bleak, too cruel, but audiences couldn't shake it. For many, it tapped into the most universal nightmare, the violation of safety, the idea that home, the one place meant to protect you, could be the stage for horror. And as the lights went up in theaters, the scariest thought lingered. The strangers could knock on any door. Number 19. One of the eeriest props wasn't fake at all. Like the cigarette lighter James fumbles with in the barn was a real vintage lighter, temperamental and unpredictable. Bertino insisted on using the real thing instead of a prop because its stubborn clicks added tension no sound effect could match. Speedman struggled with it for real, trying to coax it to life while masked killers lurked in the shadows. The frustration you see on screen, hands shaking, lips pressed tight, wasn't performance. It was Speedman trying to force fire from a relic that didn't want to work, exactly as Bertino had planned. Number 20. Even Brian Bertino wasn't immune to his creation. After filming Wrapped, he admitted he couldn't sleep easily in his own home. Every creak of wood or shift of shadow reminded him of what he had written. He said he would lie awake, imagining the slow knock at his door, the faceless mask waiting just outside. For a filmmaker who set out to capture the fear of being targeted at random, the irony was brutal. He had trapped himself in his own story. The nightmare didn't end with the credits, it followed him home. The Strangers proved that horror doesn't need monsters or ghosts to haunt you. Sometimes it's just a knock at the door. Its masks, its silence, and its randomness left audiences uneasy long after the credits rolled. And that's what makes it unforgettable. Evil doesn't need a reason. If you enjoyed these weird facts, hit that like button, drop your favorite moment from The Strangers in the comments, and subscribe for more chilling behind-the-scenes stories from the movies that keep you up at night.